There we go. Well, Tony, thanks for sitting down here. As part of my homework, I read some of your past reviews, or past interviews, and there were some great questions that you answered. It wasn't just about your business. So I am going to ask you before we get started here, what are you reading right now? Because the last two books, the Air Protein book and the Abundance book, I really found those, at least the Air Protein one, that's an angle that I've already explored too. So what are you reading now? Because I probably need to add it to my list.
Yeah, I'm now reading The Billion-Dollar Molecule, which is about, let's say, the story of Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Really great read. So I highly recommend that. And then the other book I'm reading right now is The No Rules from the founder of Netflix, talking about how they designed their company culture, which I guess is always with company cultures, depending who you ask, is either great or not so great, but it's an interesting view of how you want to structure your organization going forward.
Well, I mean, especially from your position now, because now you have a company that needs culture and you're sitting at the top, and that ivory tower, whether you like it or not, gets taller and skinnier,
Yeah. Like I said, I'm 6'8", so it's really
it's hard to hide.
A really tall ivory tower.
Yeah, and you can't hide in the corner either. Oh man, well listen, and I think I was thinking, this a whole nother interview with you just should be, what does it feel like being a founder working with the strategics like Kellogg's? Because it's a lot more than just a check. They're adding machinery, they're adding mentors, you're getting all kinds of good scientific information. That's a whole other conversation I would love to hear about. But right now I want to hear about well, before we begin, who are you, Tony? How did you get into duckweed and sitting in the seat you're in right now? What led you here?
Yeah, it's a great. This is a great question. So I'll tell you the story of Plantible and Moritz and myself. Moritz is my co-founder. So as you can tell by the accent, I'm originally from the Netherlands. Moved to the United States about 4.5 years ago. But the idea came to fruition way before that. So Moritz and I, we've known each other for like 14 years and have been good friends. And I've always been like contemplating starting a company. And after college, I started to work in agricultural commodity trading and basically worked at the Southern German commodity company, and basically with a small team of 4 or 5 people, built it out to one of Europe's largest commodity trading and processing companies over the course of 3 years. But then, after 3 years, when we built the company, we opened offices in Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Hungary, Italy, Spain, Scotland, Netherlands, obviously. It started to become a company and there was not enough to build. And so I was like, well, I'm looking for something new. And that's about the time when Moritz came to me. And, we started talking about, let's say, the future of food, the current state of the agricultural system. And there are like 4 very apparent issues, right? So obviously, first and foremost, animal agriculture specifically, but agriculture as a whole is one of the largest single contributors of climate change, right? There's a lot of CO2 emissions. And then that animal agriculture is also taking up 70% of the commodities that we produce on an annual basis. Goes to animal feed. And the problem with those commodities is that globally, 60% of our calorific intake is coming from 4 commodities, namely corn, wheat, soy, and rice, which all happen to be annual crops, meaning that they're seeded and harvested once a year. And obviously, as climate change, as we see in Europe right now, as we've seen in the United States, is starting to take more and more of an effect. These weather patterns are also going to be more volatile and creating, let's say, more volatile supply of these underlying commodities, which might result in us not having access to food for a certain period of time.
Yeah, I mean, this really does beg a question, because when I was working at an agricultural bank, one of my areas was the novel plants and novel proteins. So that's kind of what led me here to be talking to you. Yeah. So you're talking about a system that's been built over thousands of years, very specifically for different parts of those main 4 that you talked about. So even to even get close to being a fraction of a percentage of feeding into that, it's going to take a monstrous scale on the part of urine. And I'm sure that's where Kellogg was betting on the outcome a little bit there too, and kind of putting a hedge on the future there. I mean, what does that look like? I mean, if the demand tomorrow, if a switch was flipped or something, the demand for tomorrow for your protein came in, what would happen?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? I mean, I think what you're saying is it's like, if you think about agriculture, it's like one of those industries that hasn't been updated over thousands of years, right? We're still doing the exact same thing that we did 2,000 years ago, only we built some fancier machinery around it. But basically, the crops that we decided to grow and eat, we're decided on the basis like, hey, if I put this in my mouth, do I die or not, right? And that's
Well,
when we
when I think
basically
about the book, The Four Fish, you know, why do we pick these
yeah,
four fish as aquatic proteins that we want to raise in our, you know, it's,
yeah,
hey, we didn't decide these things, but we're kind of left with it. But we're left with a
yeah,
huge legacy system. So in order to
yeah,
bring a novel, I mean, you're crossing over because it's not just the carbohydrate, you got the protein there. You know, and it's
yeah.
anyway. I just saw Kim Tran has joined us, and Rach Baird is there. I'm sorry, Rach Brand. She's going to kill me for that. But
Read
Kim,
game.
Kim, I'm sorry. Kim, would you mind introducing yourself? Thank you for joining us as well. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the invitation. So my name is Kim Tran, and I work as the agricultural attaché at the Netherlands Embassy in Washington, D.C. So very good to see you, Tony, as well. I'm very, Plantible is very new to me, so I'm working here for a year now. But alternative proteins transition is a priority area for our Ministry of Agriculture. I think you're aware of that. I've seen that you've been awarded the Holland on the Hill award.
In the valley.
In the
Holland
valley.
in the
Oh, sorry.
in the
Yes,
valley. Yeah.
indeed. The hills is here, obviously. Yeah, in 2019. So even though it's a long time ago, congratulations with that. That must be a very prestigious award. So actually, I'm here with a very open mind to see what's going on. And so Andrew and I have been in contact after a webinar about controlled environment agriculture with AURI. And so that's how we got connected. So yeah, I'm curious to see what kind of linkages we can make into the activities that we have ongoing in the alternative proteins agenda. So that's on my side. Did you already? And my apologies, obviously. For
No, that's fine.
Um,
You're busy, I know, and it's hard to get into anyone's schedule these days. I'm just thankful a few people have tiled in, so this is wonderful. And then Rach here and I, kind of our common connecting point was duckweed. That was the thing that we kind of recognized we knew each other after 20 years or something, was over duckweed. So the serendipity of this conversation is amazing. And Rach knows what ingredients are all about. That's her space.
Yeah, so hi, nice to meet you, Tony and Kim. As Andrew mentioned, I've always worked in alternative proteins and in kind of on the commercialization side. So I've worked with a lot of major food brands, a lot of commercialization partners that are actually executing, like Compass Group. And I have tried to, I would say, play well with all of the guys from a landscape of there's a lot of opportunity out there, and we want to do what's best for everyone. So I now work on the debt lending side for SMEs. I like to work to support companies from the ground up. I didn't find that venture suited me well because the expectation in the space of a new and novel product to meet the returns that most venture capitalists are seeking are not necessarily always possible. So I really come from the lens of how can I help? And Andrew and I together, as he mentioned, we have this very strange connection around duckweed, but I have known him for 20 years. And I moved to a place during COVID that was literally covered in duckweed. And then I started doing some research and we had some wonderful conversations. So thanks for letting me tap in today, Andrew. I love it. And Tony, I'm looking forward to hearing your story.
And Tony, before I turn the microphone over to you, I hope you don't mind that I brought Kim into the conversation too. I figured that'd be a nice little surprise for you and a good accolade. And appreciate you
the
being
more
a good
Dutch,
sport
the
about it.
better.
That's
The more Dutch, the better. You know, so
I do play favorites of the Netherlands, so I've got multiple different things working right now. pilot programs and what have you. But anyway, that's not why we're here. I want to hear about, okay, Kellogg's gave you a lot of money, a very significant amount of money and support beyond the check. So you have got a protein that comes out of a plant. And from what I understand, and correct me on any of these facts if I'm wrong, about 40% dried weight of lemna or duckweed is protein. Dried weight. That is astounding. And you're making an emulsification or an egg white substitute out of duckweed somehow. I don't know if it's wet or if it's dry, and don't share anything you don't want to share. That's proprietary. But I am really curious about what does that look like when it comes out, and what are the attributes?
Great question. And so this ties me like a little bit back to like why we started Plantible, right? And it's, and I don't want to throw anybody on the bus, but what I do want to say is that we're on a mission to take out the word alternative from, let's say, proteins, because, you know, in the end, we're trying to produce the next generation of food ingredients, just like the iPhone was supposed to be, let's say, the new generation of telecommunication, just as the Tesla is the new, let's say, new version of the future of mobility. And so I think with proteins, you know, when the iPhone was launched, nobody called it the alternative phone, or when, let's say, the Tesla was launched, the alternative car. And so this is my personal, personal mission to try to move away as an industry from this designation of alternative, because in the end, like, hey, normally an alternative is plan B, like, hey, okay, COVID broke out, I had an amazing world trip plan, but my alternative is going to be a staycation, right? So it's never the most exciting thing that you have on your mind. So anyway, so the reason why is that, like, we identified this particular protein that has a lot of the same functional characteristics, so whether it's foaming, gelation, emulsification, fat binding, solubility, that animal proteins also have. But you know, it can produce in a much more sustainable and a much more scalable way than these animal-based proteins.
And just not interrupt you, could you just talk about how fast could it reproduce under optimal conditions? I mean, for me, it's astounding.
Yeah. So Lemna itself, or duckweed, we prefer to call it Lemna, but Lemna or duckweed, it can double in mass every 48 to 72 hours and can be grown throughout the year, right? So one of the issues we prior touched upon was the fact that you have these annual crop cycles with like soy, pea, you know, wheat. But with Lemna, you can basically harvest every day throughout the year. And the beauty of the system is that you don't need arable land, which is obviously one of the scarcer commodities that we have on this world. To be exact, we only have 20% of excess available arable land available, whereas we need to increase our productivity of food by 100% by 2050, right? So there's definitely an issue that we're going to run into there. And the only thing that you need is fresh water. So duckweed is a freshwater plant. But the fact that it grows,
well, I've heard that a slightly saline environment. I mean, what kind of tolerance are we talking about? Is it 1 part per thousand? Is it less than a part per thousand?
Yeah, the thing is, what you need to think about is that Lemna has a very unique property, which is that it's a bioaccumulator, right? So you have to see it that it's like one big mass balance. So anything that you put into your water is also going into your biomass. And so that's why
that sounds like mushrooms. That the same thing. Yeah. You can feed a mushroom through the soil if you needed to.
Yeah. And so you have to think about like, hey, what's going into my water column? Because that most likely will also end up in my biomass. So you want to make sure that you manage that properly. And similarly, to make sure that you achieve that optimal growth and that you also keep out, let's say, potential aquatic contaminants in the form of algae are kept out, is you want to make sure that whatever you put into the water is the right amount that your plant or your Lemna or duckweed needs, right? Because any excess or buildup of other nutrients will cause a lot of biological hazards down the road. But so it doubles in mass every 48 to 72 hours, can be grown throughout the year. And because it floats on the surface of water, so the big difference between Lemna and algae is 2D versus 3D, you basically have a substantially lower water footprint, because the water that you lose it's primarily lost due to evaporation, which we at Plantible try to minimize by having, let's say, these greenhouse structures, and or is absorbed by the plant, right? Because the dry matter content of Lemna is around 5 to 8%, depending on how you grow the plant. And so because of that, and because you can skim the biomass of the surface, your water footprint is substantially lower than any other terrestrial crop, because during these irrigation systems, obviously a lot of the water seeps in through the soil and is lost. Whereas with Lemna, it's controlled in, let's say, this semi-indoor environment.
One important thing I do want to let people know about, when you talk about novel plants or novel proteins, what I've seen from a financing standpoint is 1 out of every 3 years you have to expect a 100% crop loss. Now, okay, let's say that happens. Let's say the amoeba run wild or whatever gets in there and eats your Lemna. You just wait 4 days and all of a sudden everything is replicating again. So it's a very fast turnaround, even if you have to close it down and sterilize it. That's attractive from an investor standpoint.
Yeah, similarly, like if you have, let's say, some kind of breakdown whatsoever, you can quickly recuperate, right? Whereas with a lot of the terrestrial crops that might have, let's say, annual or biannual crop cycles, you can't, right? You have to wait. You have to wait for a certain period. Similarly, the overall R&D process goes much faster, right? If you want to adapt, let's say, or introduce new biostimulants, new nutrients, and whatsoever, or new polycultures, you name it, the fact that it grows so fast allows you to quickly iterate and continuously improve your overall production system.
Now, do you own the genetics?
We haven't done any genetic modification on our plants. Where, like, I mean, the Lemna family has over 1,000 different strains, which are all grown under different geographical circumstances, and therefore different environmental circumstances. So we've been primarily focused on mapping out all of these different strains, understand their different attributes, and then trying to find, let's say, a natural habitat where these plants can thrive. And so we haven't done any.
Or we can enlist Kim's help. And I mean, didn't you guys invent CRISPR? And can't we just take the things that we want and put them all together in one little genome and push that out into the water? That would be the way to go. Why? I know you selective breeding happens quickly because they replicate so quick, but why not just pick the winner off the bat?
It could be interesting. I mean, it's like, you have to imagine that where we are today, from a duckweed perspective, is we're still at the early days, right? I mean, we're talking about a plant that's primarily wild, and as I think Rach brought up, grows in local ponds and lakes, and we're trying to basically, I have these Google alerts on duckweed, and the only thing I get is like, oh, there's this town that has been invaded by duckweed, and the local fire department had to come to clean out the canal.
So negative, and it's actually so amazing.
Yeah, I know. And so, what we're trying to do is like convert this plant into an agricultural crop, right? So to your point earlier in the conversation, how can we set ourselves up that, if we get major orders from these large food companies, that we can quickly scale up and basically deploy these systems around the world? Because that's one topic that we didn't discuss, which I think is very important for the world to start to realize, is that the way we've designed our agricultural system has been highly centralized, right? So I think Brazil and the United States are responsible for 70%, right? 2 countries, 70% of the global soy supply, right? And you have similar concentrations with corn, with wheat, with rice. And what we're seeing right now is if there is a war in one of, let's say, these major production hubs, it's going to affect the rest of the world, right? You can clearly see the impact of the war in the Ukraine with Russia, which combined are responsible for a large chunk of the grain supply globally, how that's going to affect the rest of the world. And especially
you bring up a really important point. I don't want to dance around this here. You're part of the resiliency of our ability to feed our population in times of distress. Let's spin that forward. Let's say in 3 weeks, we need to modularize what you have and deploy it in a variety of places around the country. I mean, could that happen? I mean, because I don't think you're capital constrained. You just got that nice check from Kellogg's, unless you're looking for some follow-on money.
Yeah, no, as a founder, you're never not fundraising, right? But at the moment, we still have plenty of money, and we're now actually in the midst of trying to build this modular system, right? So we're now building, I guess, one of the largest aqua farms in the world. We're building a 140-acre site in the middle of Texas, in a very small rural community where we're converting a former Black Angus ranch into a plant-based protein ranch. And so a lot of support, which was something that we didn't expect, but there's a lot of support from this local rural community to help us succeed and also to be part of that success.
So will this plant also have processing capabilities too? Or is okay.
Everything.
So here's a deeper
integrated
question. This is more from my bias. The offtake, the biomass offtake after the extraction process is done, is that suitable for feedstock? So if I have friends in the insect industry, can I give this to some bugs? Can I give it to fish? Can I give it to poultry?
By the way, he's obsessed with this, so the answer is yes.
Well, and for Texas, can I feed it to shrimp? Because there are some fairly large shrimp operations in that area.
We haven't tested it on shrimp, but what is interesting, and we know this from former literature research, is that because we take out, let's say, the soluble fraction of nitrogen or protein from the biomass, right? That's the thing that we're primarily after, and that's that functional enzyme that can adequately replace animal-based proteins without forcing consumers to compromise, right? Because I think it's time that we stop fooling ourselves and say like, hey, the plant-based products are a good step in the right direction, but we can definitely work on version 3.0 and 4.0 in order to shift everybody's dietary preference. And so by removing that soluble protein fraction, what's left in, let's say, we call it the fiber cake, are primarily the membrane proteins. And what's interesting, there have been some studies in the past where, for example, with alfalfa, they see that if you take out the soluble protein fraction from the alfalfa leaf when it's fed to cattle, is that there's a substantial reduction in nitrous oxide production by animals. So you actually considerably reduce, let's say, the carbon emissions from, let's say, ruminant animals, because these soluble proteins are so easily digested that they are also immediately coming out of the body. Whereas, let's say, the membrane proteins actually improve the overall digestive system and actually reduce the carbon emissions on the cattle. So, but for shrimp, we haven't tried it.
I bet it would help for chitin too. If we're talking about the membrane, because that's always an important and insect production, which are just terrestrial seed-based proteins, which Rach knows are my favorites.
Well, can I ask some questions? Because
I did want you to jump in here because you were so smart.
I want to jump in. I'm like excited. No, so Tony, so like I am obsessed with the concept of what you're doing, but my bigger question comes down to how are the consumers going to attack this? Like, how do you actually take it out of your facility? What does the shelf life look like? And then where are you taking it now? Like, who's producing stuff using duckweed? And what does the overall market opportunity look like?
I think this is a great question. And the way, food is arguably the toughest industry out of everything, right? Because it's taste. It's all about taste, right? In the end, I think taste is the key driver, because there's only like a very small fraction of the world that's willing to sacrifice their palate in order to, save the world, right? And so what we've done is we've worked more or less backwards from like, what are the biggest challenges that the food industry is facing, whether it's that the plant-based movement or just the food industry as a whole. And our goal in the short run is, because of our limited supply, right? So we grow the duckweed and then we process it to isolate this protein, and then at the end we dry it. So the powder itself has like a shelf life of around 24 months.
Okay.
And we then sell that, or sell not yet. We're primarily in a development stage right now. And when our 140-acre module comes online by the end of this year, we can start to fulfill our first commercial contracts. We're primarily working with, let's say, food companies where our protein forms like this structuring agent, right? So think about, let's say, baking, where eggs, if you take out eggs in baking, you are not able to create the desired texture and therefore aren't able to provide the required taste. And with our protein, we can actually adequately replace chicken eggs in every food system that you can possibly imagine, without forcing consumers to compromise on taste and texture. And like, I understand that as the founder, I sound incredibly biased. And so fortunately, we're doing some consumer testing studies where we have them test, let's say, a baked good using our egg formulation versus a baked good using the chicken egg formulation. And what you can see is that there's a clear preference to consume baked goods that have our protein over that with a chicken.
And it
chicken
doesn't
egg.
change the color in, like, let's say a white product, it still isn't
No,
turned green?
yeah, we remove what we do in our downstream process is we separate the chlorophyll from our protein. So this enzyme that we're isolating is naturally colorless and white or white and neutral tasting. And so we basically fractionate the leaf and then specifically concentrate this enzyme that we're after.
That's amazing. We're going to have to get you in front of Paratus, who is one of the largest baking companies in the world. And they are completely obsessed with new kinds of ideas on the market. So I think they would love to try this product. It's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It will be great. It will be great. Yeah.
So who are you testing with now? Like beyond just the baking, I mean, can you share any of your upcoming offtake agreements or what you plan to do next?
Yeah, so I mean, like, I think it's a public secret that like Kellogg's is one of our investors. So obviously it would make sense that we're working with Kellogg's on product development. Then, you know, I can't go into many other commercial engagements because we've signed, let's say, confidentiality agreements. But the thing is for us, and this is like the biggest challenge for us in this industry as a whole, or as a novel protein player, to Andrew's point earlier, you're always playing catch up, right? Because you're trying to build this novel infrastructure, which is one of the challenges with new plant types, especially with aquatic plant types, because there's no existing infrastructure that you can immediately tap into. And so we're always trying to play catch up with producing enough samples so that our commercial partners can continue their evaluation. And now we're finally getting to a point that we can build this modular system and can actually start to produce enough product to start to fulfill and convert some of the last trials into these commercial agreements. But right now, as it looks today, based on the commercial agreements that we have in place or are finalizing, we've sold out our initial module 12 times. So
you're just going to keep building new plants? Is that the goal?
Yeah, the goal is to, like, that's indeed the goal. So the idea is to create like this modular system, which can then, if you want to build, let's say 10x that size, you just implement 10 modules, right? And then hopefully with the idea to also be able to build out these modules in regions where there is a urgent need to become self-sustaining when it comes to macronutrients such as proteins, such as Southeast Asia or Africa, obviously.
So, and I like particular community that you've landed in Texas. I know Texas, like right now, has been identifying communities that have had things like gut health problems as a result of the malnutrition. So this could be something that really transitions the community from the inside out in a really unique way. I'm wondering, so just, I have two questions. One on that is like, are you working with hospitals to kind of test ways that this product could have long-term effects and be used as like a targeted plant medicine? So my background is in food as medicine. That's my absolute belief that we have ruined ourselves and the only way back is by using plants. So I'm a huge fan of companies, who are really trying to use and leverage plants as our future forward medicine, because that's where it came from, right? We've now forgotten about it along the way. So that's one question. The second is related to your offtake. So your byproducts. So when you remove or extract the chlorophyll, what do you do with that? Do you resell that as a secondary product?
Yeah, so your first question, we are not right now working with hospitals, but I would love to connect with you offline and see whether there's something that we can do together. Definitely very interested in exploring that side more. So what we've seen with, let's say, our protein and its amino acid profile is that it's optimal for, let's say, the based on the FAO's recommendation. We've also done some digestibility studies, which showed, let's say, digestibility similar to, let's say, dairy and egg protein. So it looks very favorable from that angle. But then again, we haven't done any clinical trials or anything along those lines. So I would love to chat with you offline to see what we can do there. And then on the byproducts, we're evaluating multiple options. I think, like, for us, we're always resource constrained. So we're trying to balance with, let's say, moving full speed ahead, and then try to identify interesting applications. So what we've seen in, let's say, the fiber cake that we're producing is that lemna or duckweed has a very interesting pectin structure that's inside of the plant. And normally pectins are used obviously as a binding or emulsifying agent in foods, normally derived from what's it called? Let's say orange peels or citrus peels. What we see with the Lemna pectin, for example, is that it can provide this coating that will enhance, let's say, the germination of seeds, which generally have a germination rate of around 60%. But this particular pectin that you can derive from Lemna actually increases that germination rate from 60 to 90%. And so that could be a very interesting application in the agricultural space. But that's something that's still, let's say, to be developed and to be understood. But that could be very interesting. In the meantime, we're also testing it as animal feed because we can see, let's say, a huge footprint reduction, not only from the cow's emissions, but also if you swap out alfalfa. I don't know how aware you are of alfalfa and how incredibly bad it is for our overall water supply in the United States and globally. If you can swap out something that's so damaging to the environment for something that is very sustainably and scalably reduced, while bringing down, let's say, the overall CO2 emissions within cattle, that's what we're focusing on in the short run.
Incredible. Love it. Thank you. I know, Andrew, there's a million questions, so you probably should get
Well, I would like to, I mean, Kim is here. So Kim, I'm going to give you the floor to ask any question you would like of Tony.
Yeah, well, as I said, I'm here with an open mind and mainly to absorb information, but I do have a question. It seems like you are growing a lot. Plantible has you said that you're sold out your modules already 12 times. So geographically seen, where's your focus in the US? Where do you see where are your growth areas?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, like, to give you a little bit of a background story, so we moved from the Netherlands to San Diego at the end of 2017, early 2018. And the reason why we moved to San Diego was because we were able to take over a distressed algae farm for free. And even though there's like distinct differences between Lemna and algae, there's also some similarities. And we were obviously, Kim, we're Dutch, we're known for our cheapness and frugality. So when we were able to get this facility in San Diego for free, Moritz and I were like, okay, let's jump on the plane and move to the other side of the world. And so that's where we build out the company. And that's also where the majority of our team is currently based. But then, last year we raised our Series A and with the idea to build out, let's say, this commercial demo plan, as we call it. And that's when we started to look nationally, like, okay, what might be the best place to build this out? And, even though California is a great place, at the same time, getting stuff done in a relatively rapid pace might not always be feasible, considering, let's say, some of the permitting processes and also the cost of land. And so what we started to look for is basically an area where there would be a good, stable climate, where there would be access to fresh water, whether there would be access to power, and just plenty of land to scale out. And then, we found this place in the middle of Texas, in the Texas highlands, where there's a very stable climate throughout the year. It's on top of an aquifer, so we have direct access to fresh water, and there is power close by. And so we're like, well, this is great. And then obviously, like, not to be demeaning or anything, it's Texas, so it's build first, ask later, right? So you can basically build really rapidly, and that's how we started. And right now, this plot of land that we're building this facility on has a total size of 40,000 acres, so around 20,000 hectares. So there's plenty of room there to expand in the near future. But at the same time,
let me ask you, would you consider making that an academic campus of some sort, maybe a transition campus from school to work and create a generational workforce?
Absolutely. I mean, what we're seeing already is, you have to imagine, this is like the heartland of Texas. So there used to be a lot of opportunity in the oil and gas industry, but there's nothing more volatile than working in the oil and gas industry as well. But over the years, also a lot of these oil wells start to dry up. Fracking started to slow down because there was less oil and gas available. So what they've seen in that region particularly is a huge brain drain over the past couple of years, where people are starting to move away to look for other opportunities. But now that we're coming there, you see the local community, and don't forget, this is like the heartland of rural Texas, right? So it's like people generally aren't that excited about plant-based proteins and stuff like that. And so here we come, and they really welcomed us with open arms. And people are quitting their jobs now in the local area to come and work for us because we're somewhat the talk of the town. And it's just amazing to see, next to, let's say, the environmental impact, also the social impact you can have on a rural community like this. And we're trying to work very closely with the local colleges and universities to your point, build that academic connection and give people an opportunity when they graduate to come and work with us, but also during their degree program to maybe do internships or actually have, let's say, class projects to take part at our facility in Texas.
Well, I mean, going back to the traditional agriculture, one of the questions I saw you answered in another interview, as well as one that's here in the chat box, is can you compare Lemna to soy? I mean, because there's a lot of money and research that's been pumped into soy over the years, a lot of good tweaking of the genome. So it's doing the things we wanted to do in the climate conditions we wanted to do it in. So can you talk about the contrast there a little bit and the similarities too?
Yeah, of course. I think we have to go back to like the reason why we started to grow soy, right? Soy was introduced as a rotational crop, right? We were growing corn 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And then we saw that, you know, soy's nitrogen fixing capabilities were beneficial for growing more and more corn. And then actually we never really figured out because the beans themselves were not palatable for local communities. And actually the first product that came out of soy was soy milk, where they basically boiled the soybeans and then started to drain it in order to create milk. But once again, we never chose soy because it was that amazing of a protein source for humans. It just happened to be a great rotational crop, and we started to figure out what we were going to do with the bulk availability of it. And so if you look at, let's say, Lemna, specifically our protein, you know, it's actually its amino acid profile compared to the FAO recommendation, right? So it's primarily around, let's say, the essential amino acids, which are the amino acids that your body doesn't produce, and then particularly in specific ratios, right? So like if you have more essential amino acids, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's better for your body because it needs to have those essential amino acids in the right ratio. And if you look at, if you were to single out all of these proteins based on their respective essential amino acid ratios, you need the least protein in order to get your daily recommended intake of these essential amino acids by consuming our protein, and twice or 50% less than if you had to only eat soy. So for soy, you need to eat around 70 to 80 grams of soy protein isolate in order to get your recommended daily intake of these essential amino acids. And with Ruby, it's around 40 grams. And so that's a huge difference from that perspective.
And here, this may be a myth, but does Lemna have omega-3 in it? Or is that just, maybe it's a different strain or where it's grown? Okay.
It's negligible because the overall lipid content in Lemna is pretty low. The overall lipid content's pretty low. But it's a protein powerhouse, right? So it produces a lot of protein. And then what's interesting as well is we've done, let's say, a study with the University of Nebraska, who are experts in allergenicity and assessing allergenicity of ingredients. And they basically ran our protein in the database, and it didn't cross-react with any of their known protein allergens. So it seems to be very allergen friendly.
That's something you want to put in a highlighter if you're writing down these words. That's amazing.
So Tony, I actually have an allergen to soy, so it's never been a great product for me to eat. So I break out in hives, and I'm also vegan, so it's been an unusual way to raise myself, whatever, to be a part of my life. And eggs I'm also allergic to. So I'm very excited to try this because I'm like waiting for this to be my total solution to all my problems. But the other thing that I know that Andrew and I have talked about a few times is like this actually, in terms of protein and the kind of protein that it does, how it reacts with your body, I understand it to be like almost better than having any kind of soy protein for performance. So I don't know if that's true. Okay.
100%. Yeah, it's BCA. Like if you think about performance, they generally look at the branched chain amino acids, right? So like it has a higher branched chain amino acid content than soy.
I don't know what that means because I'm a consumer, but I'm just saying out loud that I think like, so I'd like to introduce you to David Michael Goldman, who is incredible. And he did Game Changers with James Cameron on Netflix. Oh, yeah. And his focus is like, so, you know, a lot of people are really involved in this today, like Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn from the Cleveland Clinic as an example, who are monitoring different types of proteins and plant-based products that really do help to change the chemical reactions within your body and make it possible for you to stave off, type 2 diabetes and heart disease and things like that. So I wonder if there's a way that this could be tested. I keep coming back to the testing because the part that to me feels most relevant is how can we prove that this is better than everything else?
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I would love to connect offline and then we can figure out how we can get this going. Yeah. And then we can also send you some samples of our products.
Yes, I'm ready. Let's go.
Yeah, good.
Well, you know what? If you're sending her the samples of the stuff you consume as a human being, that offtake piece, I have some insect farms that have already been funded that are looking for some trial material. If you want to send that their way, and we can test the chitin yield after eating your membrane versus the spent greens or something. Okay, good. Thank you. Anyway, well, I want to get on that negotiation there. I know Rachel, she jumps in there, gets all the good stuff, and I'm left with the offtake.
What are some, so outside of the eggs, so there's I saw some bars that people have been making. Have they tried it in a mushroom burger or as a binder within a burger?
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about, let's say, some of the functional properties that the protein has, right? It can emulate, let's say, certain functional properties that eggs have, some of the functional properties that dairy proteins have, but also some of the functional properties that meat proteins have. And so to your point, you can use it as a binder in different food systems. Yeah.
Hey, Tony, can I ask you a question? So you've mentioned a few nutritional information. Who did that research, and is that readily available, which you can share? I would be very interested. So I'm interested in who did that research, how was it financed? Maybe Plantible did it themselves or someone else. And what do you see as an opportunity for the future for your company to grow further?
That's a good question. So first, yeah, we finance most of it ourselves. We work with academic institutions as well as external laboratories. But yeah, upon request, we can always share that respective information. And then the second question, yeah, I mean, we still have our hands full. We're building this facility in Texas, which is obviously going to be a huge undertaking, and that's the only thing that's on my mind right now. But after that, our goal is once again to build this modular system. And I think we're primarily interested in that, the Western world has plenty of access to proteins, right? And I think if you think about what food should actually function as and how our supply chain should be designed, it's all about enhancing the availability and access to nutrition, right? And so our goal is literally to create these modular systems that can be deployed in let's say Southeast Asia, right? A region that is a net importer of protein. Similar, can we do something in China, who's also a net importer of protein? Can we build systems in, let's say, sub-Saharan Africa, where you work with the local communities to create their own independent food supply chains, so that we actually enhance the overall supply and availability of nutrition? And our goal is not we're going to grow from 8 to 10 billion people in the next 30 years, right? So that's going to be a lot of people too.
Or the inverse, where the population number crashes and we have to feed who we got nearby where it is. So I'm keenly interested in the modularity piece of this. If we can set up some sort of contract growth system similar to we have here with the poultry industry, that I think there'll be a lot of farmers and agriculturalists, agronomists that would love to get in on this. And the neat thing about, at least from my perspective, from what I've done, the indoor grow, not even using sunlight, but using LEDs and light like that, you can stack these. So a 1 acre facility become 50 with 50 trays stacked up that way. Just more of a scientific question. I know the photons typically come from the top. Have you looked at photons coming in from the bottom as well? Is that an option? Anything at all about that, if you're limited on how much energy you can pull in?
Yeah, we're looking into those things. I mean, you have to think about, let's say, obviously different variables that go into play and that could affect your plant. Doing that also the respective energy consumption.
That's my other question is heat range. Kind of where does that sit? I mean, you're in a controlled environment, but what's it going to tolerate?
Yeah, it's different, right? So once again, there's over
That's
1,000
true.
different genotypes. And so some genotypes are, let's say, more tolerant to lower temperatures or higher temperatures than others. And that's the beauty of the system, that the plant is geographically agnostic. So you can actually find local strains and cultures that thrive specifically in certain angles of the world, and can use that to your advantage when you build out those systems.
Excellent. So the first question, I didn't even ask you the first question, is how can the audience help you? I mean, you've got a lot going on right now. As I read the last interview, you said the help you needed was government permitting, but I assume that was when you're in California, not in Texas, because everything's easy in Texas, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, maybe the article helped because we applied for three-phase power in California about 3 years ago, and we recently got a recognition of reception. So they finally received our application. So that's good.
Well, that's cold.
So I mean, right now, I think we're getting closer to going to market, but obviously we're still such in an early day, right? I mean, like, we're building a 140-acre facility, which sounds huge, but at the same time, it's also nothing in the grander scheme of things. So, you know, I would love to continue my conversation with Rach, right? See how we can actually work out, let's say, more proof points on, let's say, the health aspect of the protein. Obviously, I always enjoy connecting with fellow Dutch people. So I'll follow up with Kim and see, like, hey, how we can collaborate more closely with the embassy here in the Netherlands. So far, they've been incredibly supportive, but obviously strengthening those ties is great. I think other than that, you know, we have plenty of exciting job openings open right now, and whether it's process engineers, biochemists, or people that just have a passion for farming operations. You know, if you know anybody, or if you know people, academic institutions, professors, or other, let's say, captains of industry to connect with, yeah, feel free to let
I
me
think
know.
that's going to be an easy one. So I'll put a list together, Tony. But here in UConn, and University of Connecticut, it's a huge, massive university, and they have a tremendous agricultural industry
Great.
school here, and also at Cornell, which is where I spent time.
Well, and one of my favorites too. I love Cornell.
Yeah. So
I have a question about labor, if I may. So we know that there's a large shortage. Do you also experience that, and what knowledge level are you looking at? For instance, how big is your current team now, and what kind of education do they have, like higher or lower?
Yeah, that's a good question, and definitely it's been a tough labor market. I think it's been really tough. You know, like, we're now, like, 2 years ago we were with 5 people. Last year we were with 20, and now we're at 52. So we've been growing quite rapidly. We have about 40 people right now in San Diego, and around 10 people in Texas. And because we're like this symbiotic company where, yes, we do, let's say, a lot of research on the bench, but we also have to translate that research into agricultural practices. We basically have a broad range of different backgrounds in our teams, where some people, you know, have high school degrees, college degrees, or postdoc degrees. And so it's a very healthy mix, because in the end, you know, we're this integrated value chain that doesn't only take place in the lab, but also outdoor on large plots of land using farming methodologies, right? And so we're actually looking for people with all kinds of diverse backgrounds to come and join us.
Well, I'll be sure to promote this on all my channels, and then I'll be the call to action. If you want to save the world, go see Tony in Texas. He'll take care of you.
Well, Andrew, are you posting something on social media? We can share that, including a call for including your request, Tony, that you're hiring.
Yeah, awesome. That would be great.
Yeah, and it'd be nice to have more people that speak Dutch as well in the facility.
We actually, over the past years, we have done, let's say, we have had a couple of Dutch interns. So there are, let's say, these visa programs that, you know, people that are finalizing their thesis in the Netherlands can go abroad to work for a company in order to support their overall thesis. which has been great for me, but also has been not so great for the rest of the company, because suddenly there's a lot of Dutch being spoken on the work floor. And it's not considered one of the most beautiful languages in the world, but
Oh, this is wonderful. Well, Tony, listen, I thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I know how busy you are. You got a 140-acre facility to get up and operational in a very short period of time. So you have a lot on your plate. You took some time to answer questions and chat with our friends here. I really do appreciate this. And I'm going to turn the recording off now.